Hey, everybody. Mike Shea here, along with Ryan Mendoza. We are the co-creators of Miskatonic High, and we are here to talk about issue number 19, Bad Karma. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing great. Okay, so issue 19, we had previously seen Ren and Simon go off on their trip. So Ren was going to the Philippines to try and find her mother. Simon got stuck on a lengthy layover there and had to help her out. And so to return the favor, Ren has decided to come with Simon to India to confront, to meet, to investigate Simon's grandfather, who appears in the Necronomicon. And the mad Arab had supposedly met him and talked to him about um, studies having to do with sound and travel and portals and space and time and things of that nature. So in the adventure, in the Philippines, Simon had gotten a view into the future where he had seen himself, um, and his grandfather, and it seemed like his grandfather was doing something and basically telling him that time can't be altered. But we don't really know what that means yet. Simon doesn't know what that means yet. Um, but so basically that's the backstory leading into this issue. Um, Let's start off like we normally do, talking about the cover, because I love this one. I think this is a great cover. Really gets into a lot of the things that we're going to get into in this issue. Why don't you talk a bit about how you came up with this concept and the execution of it?
Yeah, I had a few good ideas about the cover going into this, but this one really stood out because in a way, it's kind of simple,
Hmm.
if you can call it that.
Well, except for the background.
I wanted to play with the duality at
Hmm.
the same time, show what was happening in the issue without doing too much spoilers. Although,
Hmm.
even though it looks like a spoilery cover, it really doesn't tell the entire story of it.
Right.
So, like I said, came up with a few other ideas, but it kind of looked the same as previous adventures of Simon and Ren.
Hmm.
So I wanted to deviate from that.
Hmm.
And so I decided to try this kind of abstract image
Hmm.
consisting of Simon and the Mad Arab.
Hmm.
And I wanted, as we will see in the issue, it will delve into stuff like reincarnation.
Hmm.
And then that's why I wanted to integrate the circular
Hmm.
figure 8 in the cover somehow.
Hmm.
And I couldn't do that with the other concepts that
Yeah.
I had.
Hmm.
And this was a great way to do that without being too intrusive
Hmm.
and obvious at the same time. So in the end, it really worked out, and I'm really happy with the results of it.
I am too. One of the things that really strikes me is I like it conceptually, but I also love the execution of it. The I really like the look of Simon. He's contemplative. It's his expression is really interesting, and then mirrored with that of the Mad Arab. No, they're not like sneering at the audience. They're not playing up, one is good, one is bad. It really is. It just feels like they're two parts to the same character that are fixed together somehow, but they haven't really figured it out yet. And there's no good or evil there. It's two characters, and I really really like that you didn't lean heavily on, one is light or one is dark, or which some people have done in the past. You
Mhm.
really just played it straight, that these are just two characters without putting morality on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the issue also played with a lot of time elements.
Hmm.
And I was contemplating on whether I wanted to add that to the cover, but I decided against it
Hmm.
and concentrated on other images instead, which we will find out in the issue as
Hmm.
we talk about later.
Right. Right, and I really like the way you handle the backgrounds. We'll talk a bit more about it when we see it in the issue, but the way that you're incorporating a lot of the different sort of dimensions that we've seen or seen glimpses of, they're
Mhm.
really nice touches, but you use color in a way that doesn't make them overly confusing. Like, you could have overly done the color so that they would really be clashing with what's going on in the foreground, but really by sort of making them this muted color, they really sort of, they make a nice background, but there's still a lot interesting there that you can look at.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
colors are muted in a way that it pushes the image back into the background.
Mhm,
But at the same time, it still has that fidelity in it. It
mhm,
still has the light to draw your the eye's attention to it.
mhm,
But if you notice, the lights are are more focused on the faces of the characters.
mhm.
Like one image kind of um, illuminates the face of Simon, while
Yeah.
the other one illuminates the head of the Mad Arab,
Mhm.
and as well as the sun behind the pyramids.
Yeah.
So even though it would have been distracting in concept, it
Mhm,
kind of lends itself to the whole image
mhm.
by doing that. It
Right.
brightens up the image.
Yeah.
So that's one of that's a tip I can give to people who make covers. Make it bright and shiny.
Right. But I love one of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, is the way you sort of create a color palette and the way, okay, so you have these sort of muted sort of maroon sort of colors in the background, but I really like the way that you're playing with the blues, both in Abdul's glowing blue hand, but also the blue of the flute and then the blue of the circle. It draws those elements together in a way that I really like.
Yeah, yeah. When you finish an image, you
Mhm,
kind of look at it from afar,
mhm,
and usually you zoom in and out of the image, and you do other tricks with Photoshop, wherein you can make the whole thing
mhm,
grayscale,
mhm.
and then you will see the values
Oh, wow.
differently from that point of view.
Mhm.
So you will see whether a color is clashing or
Mhm.
disappearing in the background. Like
Oh.
maybe one color is too similar to another in terms of hue and
Mhm,
value.
mhm.
So that's the one way you can see the image in a different light,
Hmm.
so to say.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's not really intentional that I do these things. Just
Mhm,
more balancing the colors
mhm,
in as a universally with the whole image.
mhm,
And it's not like I pick colors individually.
mhm,
It just happens when I use certain filters on the image,
mhm,
just like the background.
mhm.
If it's colored localized, what I mean is it's colored the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It will be as saturated as the rest of the cover.
Mhm.
But you put on a reddish filter on it, and it mutes the whole color
Hmm.
immediately, and then
Mhm,
you just adjust it bit by bit just to make things pop out more, and the others a bit more muted, just
mhm,
like that.
hmm,
So it's just stuff that you learn along the way as
mhm,
you work on the artwork,
mhm.
and you know sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and
Yeah.
It's just trial and error in most of the cases.
Mhm. Well, I think this one works really strikingly well. I ended up, for some of the rewards, we make like little stickers or we make magnets or things like that. And this is a case where I wasn't just happy to make a magnet out of it. I also turned it into a sticker because I love the image so much that, it pops in just a really nice way. It's a very striking image, and I mean, granted, we've talked a lot about this, but I really like duality. It comes up a lot in our
Mhm.
series, and so there's just something about this that I from concept to execution, it works so perfectly.
Yeah, yeah. And besides, I need new coasters.
Yeah, and they're upstairs on my coffee table. Yep, yep. So circles always work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So moving into the issue, we have Alex telling us what previously happened, basically filling us in on uh, Ren and Simon's trip to the Philippines, and basically just filling us in on the background of what happened in issue 14 and 15. And basically, they've just been flying on the airplane for the last three issues. Um, and then we go ahead and get into the issue. The issue is basically two separate time periods, and we flip back and forth between them. Um, we wanted I- in issue 13, Joseph Kerwin had told Simon about his grandfather appearing in the Necronomicon, and it sort of referenced when Simon's father was a child. And so we basically figured out, okay, that's going to be around 1971. So we're telling that time period at the same time as we're telling, the modern time of Simon and Ren. So back in 1971, Simon's father is outside with his grandfather. Um, talking, and Simon's grandfather is telling his father, we don't have time to I don't have time to talk about, Einstein's theories of time and fate and things like that. I'm trying to do these recordings. Meanwhile, this figure is approaching um, Simon's father and Simon's grandfather, um, and basically looking for Simon's father, Oliver. Um, Simon's father, Oliver, is of course very scared of this weird guy who's approaching them, and his grandfather basically tells him to get away. But then we find out that it is the mad Arab Abdul al Hazared, um, the writer of the Necronomicon, who has come to them with a warning, and the warning is for Oliver. Um, uh, that something is going to happen terrible in his future. So let's talk for a second about Al Hazared, because we haven't seen him since issue one. It's been a long time for him to sort of be lurking in the background. And we knew he was going to appear here, but he had to look different because Simon sort of figured out that Al Hazared has been living backwards from about 2018 all the way to about, I think we decided somewhere around 700 AD, so about 1300 years. Um, Here he's only gone through about 40 or 50 years, so it was a smaller period of time. So we didn't want him to look quite as crazy and bedraggled as we see him in issue one. So, how did you make the decision of how he should appear here, knowing that, he's sort of much younger here than he was going to be in issue one?
Yeah. Well, it's not really much different from the last time we saw him, but he's a bit more well kept here.
Hmm.
So no, uh, the beard is much shorter.
Yeah, a little
The
trimmed.
hair the hair is actually a bit longer here.
Hmm.
He does look kind of younger here.
Hmm.
not as grizzled as the last time we saw him.
Hmm.
And even the robes he's wearing is not as tattered,
Yeah.
although it's still frayed in the. But I think that's just a fashionable thing back then. So yeah, he's cleaner here. So maybe if we compare him from the last time we see him, it's not a big departure
Right.
for that. It's
Right.
just subtle things,
Right.
and I think that's better than who's this guy?
Right.
He
Right.
has to be recognizable.
Right. We really want the people who have been reading since issue 1 to recognize him pretty quickly.
Yeah, but they get the impression that he looks different here,
Hmm.
and that's the reasoning for that.
Hmm. Okay. Um, the other thing that's sort of striking about this is the setting. So when we talked about doing this issue, we talked about where Oliver and his grandfather and his father, um, Gumta, um, would live, and his mother would live, and sort of we knew that they were in sort of a town in India, that the grandfather has been a professor, and so we knew that he was, a little well off, that he was okay, that he probably lived in a town or a village somewhere. Um, but we also needed to make it clear that when Simon goes to that same place, that it's a different time, and we're doing that with captions by saying one is 1971 and one is saying 2018. But we also needed to do it visually, and so one of the things that sort of really jumps out at you really quickly is sort of the yellow sky. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about trying to establish the two different timelines just visually.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be like a representation of that certain time period.
Hmm.
You can differentiate different scenes by using time, like one is in the afternoon and one is in the morning.
Hmm.
So this one was set more likely in the afternoon, and the other one is more in the morning.
Mm, okay.
So that's how I differentiated it. And this one, if you'll notice, it's filled with grass.
Hmm.
And the other one is more barren. So maybe that time is more of the summer dry
Hmm.
period in India, and this is more of the lush period.
Mm, okay.
So that's how I differentiated it. But the
Mm,
house remained almost the same. Maybe
mhm,
there's a bit of wear and tear in the newer one,
mhm.
but yeah, it's just subtle things, just like
Right.
with Abdul.
Mhm. Right. It's certainly, it's one of those things where I can tell just looking at it visually which time period we're in. And granted, I've stared at this image for days and days on end, so I might be a little bit more able to do that than your normal reader. But it really is visually noticeable even without the captions. But we wanted to add the captions just to sort of give the readers a little step up, just so that they know exactly when we are, because it can get a little confusing in here.
Mhm.
Okay, so next we go to our modern time, 2018, with Simon and Ren on a train heading towards uh, his grandfather's house, to Gupta's house. Um, Basically wanted to give them a little time before they got there to sort of discuss, some of the stuff that we needed to sort of lay the groundwork for where we're going. Wanted to remind readers yet again about sort of Simon's journey here, about going to visit his father in issue 12 in the prison, where he had gone, after being convicted of murdering Trish's mother. Um, that it had turned out that it was beings from another dimension who are attuned to certain frequencies, that come on through certain kinds of music and then appear in windows, and it's all this sort of goopy stuff, and trying to basically pull um, people out through the windows using this goopy stuff. Um, so reminded readers of that, but then also started to get into some bits about Gupta and who he was, because he was a professor, and he's really kind of important to the story, but also, as we'll find out, he's kind of important to Simon as an individual. Um, Gupta was a professor of physics, worked with Einstein, um, really, the theory of relativity let's try that again. The theory of relativity, the idea of time being a circle, but also one of the things that Einstein is famous for is that he believes in, um, that time has already happened, that all of time has already happened, and it's just our perspective making us think that time is actually occurring linearly, that we're in this moment right now. According to him, everything's already been decided. There's fate. What's going to happen is going to happen. It's already been decided, but it's only our perception of it that makes us think that we have any free will whatsoever. Um, a friend of Einstein's by the name of Kurt Gödel came up with this theory that yes, time does exist in a circle, but that you can depart from one point in the circle and enter in at another point in the circle, basically creating the idea through theoretical physics that time travel is possible. That they've been able to determine that yes, theoretically, time travel is possible for particles to go leave our timeline and come back at a different point in the timeline. And basically, this idea of overlapping circles, which he draws for Ren and explains basically this whole idea to Ren. Ren points out, because, there's this idea that Ren is just sort of an airhead who likes social media, but she's actually a lot smarter than she gets credit for, I think. Um, And not only does she understand the theory, mainly from having watched Back to the Future with Alex and having Alex explain it all, but also understands that the grandfather is important to Simon. Simon comes from a father and a grandfather who are basically geniuses. Um, and he's got to live up to that. We saw that in
Mhm.
issue 12 that Simon is expected to be perfect, and
Yeah,
that isn't something new that came just from his father. It's been coming from generations. Um, we also find out that his grandfather did meet with Abdul al-Hazred, and then after that left being a professor, left physics, and basically took on studying Hindu mysticism, which we will talk about more.
yeah. I
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
want to I
Mhm.
just
Go ahead.
want to go into that thing
Mhm,
with Kurt Goodell about the perception
mhm,
of time,
mhm,
and I think we have a theme for this issue,
mhm,
and there's another theme here, which is
mhm.
perception.
Right.
As you mentioned,
Mhm,
Ren is often viewed as a airhead because she's usually spouting off weird things about modern times
mhm,
and social media.
mhm,
But really, if you look into her character, it's more of a cover
mhm,
for what she's really dealing with.
mhm,
And like you said, it's really more of a perception. I don't know if she's actually wanting to do this on purpose for people to see her this way,
mhm.
or it's just coming off like that. But
Yeah,
if you will notice throughout the whole issue, it's the theme. There's a hidden theme there about perception,
yeah.
and
About
even
how we
with
yeah.
yeah, even with Simon's family, we
Mhm.
will perceive them in one way,
Yep.
and then we will perceive them in another way later on.
Right.
So yeah, I kind of like that with the whole circular
Mhm.
things
Yeah,
and how it melds with the storyline as
right,
a thematic thing.
right. And Not just perception, but that but choice. Like, we
Hmm.
are perceived a certain way, and it sort of creates a choice where if someone perceives us a certain way, or we perceive ourselves a certain way, we can continue to actually be that way, or we can choose to be different. That
Correct.
right, and so everybody's sort of making choices, and about how they are, and we'll get it more into that. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's a lot to this, as we talked about it, and as we worked on the script and all of that, it kept getting sort of deeper and deeper, which, I really like. I think this is one of those issues that rewards repeat reading quite a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Not the least of that you'll understand the time travel a lot better.
Nosebleeds.
Yeah. So the other thing that we're doing is not so Simon is expected to be perfect. His grandfather was perfect. His father was perfect. But also there was that thing about where he saw his grandfather in the future, and he came across as basically evil, that he was sort of doing something to Simon and basically, scolding him, and Simon himself was trying to tell Simon in the past, be careful because the grandfather set it up from the beginning, and we have no idea what that means. So as they're getting to the town that they're going to, there's this concern about the grandfather, and exactly, is he evil? Is he good? And for Simon, who's sort of has been plagued since, about issue 6 or so, with this idea that he's going to become Abdul al-Hazred and become a murderer and become all these terrible things that he's seen and heard about, how can he change his fate? How can he not become this person? That's really what Simon is doing here. And for him, it's kind of a math problem. It's like Simon plus something equals Al-Hazard, and he's trying to solve for that thing, because if he can solve for that thing and eliminate it, then he doesn't have to become this terrible person that he's afraid he's gonna become.
Yeah, I think Simon's brain is very logical in the way
Mhm,
that everything is an equation for him.
mhm,
Everything is something that he has to solve. And that's why that thing is again the perception that
mhm,
people think he's kind of aloof or um yes, he's standoffish in a way, but
mhm.
it's more of like he's overthinking things.
Yeah,
And that makes him kind of awkward for other people.
right,
And it's not it's not really his fault. It's
right,
just that, like you said, he's experienced a lot of things that he's kind of scared of repeating those same mistakes.
mhm,
And so he tries to, he recognizes that he's smart enough to solve things.
mhm,
And he thinks that he can solve his way through life.
right,
But, it's never always that simple.
right. Yeah, for Simon, it's like, if he can use his logic and if he can be perfect, he can solve anything in his life. And the thing is, because he's like that, it creates so many more problems for him than he really needs. Um, one of we talk about perception, there's also coming into this season was the perception of Ren and Simon just as friends. The fact that they weren't friends, that Ren has really kind of been very weary of Simon ever since issue 6, when, basically he kind of attacked her, and, while under the influence of the Giddim and all that. And that she really has never forgiven him, and that she makes fun of him a lot and just is kind of mean to him, but in a way that Ren is just kind of the way she is. She's very blunt. Um But something sort of is changing between, what happened in the Philippines, um, and what is happening here, that you can tell that they're starting to become friends. They're starting to trust one another. They're starting to make jokes about each other. There's a nice joke about when Simon is talking about trying to figure out the solution to his problems, and she's like, "You really miss school, don't you?"
Mhm.
Which I thought was which I think is a nice way of sort of the way that Ren is friendly with people. She's sort of she she teases them, and
Yeah.
I think they're becoming friends. So
I think that's the way kids are
hmm
back in high school,
hmm
wherein you kind of tease the person that you kind
hmm
of like.
hmm
Sometimes it's not romantic or
right.
anything, but you just have this certain thing about other people that you're more at ease about teasing them than other people are, because
hmm
you know that you're gonna get dead if you mess
right.
with the wrong people. So yeah, I mean the overall storyline of what is this, season 3?
hmm
Yeah, I mean we separate all the characters. I think
right.
that's pretty obvious now,
Right.
but in a way it kind of draws them closer together.
Yes.
So the
Mhm.
pairings are obvious. They will become closer with each other, just
Right.
like with other previous issues like Matt and Sarah.
Yep.
But at the same time, like you mentioned, you really miss school, don't you? It's also like that. They, being just the two of them, they kind of miss the other
Right.
guys, because they slowly the characters are realizing that they kind of need the other guys to solve the problems that they're facing, that they're having a hard time just being the two of them, or
hmm
being alone like Alex.
hmm
And yeah, we're kind of seeing that. And hopefully as the season progresses, we will see a payoff happen.
hmm Gee, I wonder if we will.
Have you written it?
Have you drawn it? Okay, so we sort of set up these perceptions about that the grandparents are possibly evil, and there's something bad is going to happen once Simon and Ren gets there. And partly why we do this is we're setting up jokes. So you think that they're going to be evil, and then immediately you come across the grandmother who's just so excited to see Simon and loves him and adores him, and um, so that's one running joke that we have throughout this issue. The other running joke that we establish is the grandma is so happy to see Simon, then is happy to see Ren because she's absolutely sure that Ren is Simon's girlfriend,
Mhm.
which they both are quick to point out, no, not involved in the slightest. And she's like, "Oh, you guys can't fool me." Um, so basically, having those two running jokes throughout the rest of this issue. Um, to go on. Meanwhile, we also meet the grandfather, who's a bit more standoffish, but the grandma's like, "Oh, don't worry about him. He's just stuffy. He adores you. He thinks the world of you." Um, okay, so let's talk about we're now in modern times. Has For the drawing of it, has the village changed since the 1970s? It feels maybe more modern. It's I know we didn't have any scenes with it, but it feels like there's more stalls and things like that where you can go and get like treats and stuff.
Yeah, when I first heard that we were going to do an issue in India, I was
Mhm.
kind of nervous, because although I've seen a lot of movies and
Mhm,
shows about the place,
mhm,
when you're not familiar, when you haven't been to that place,
mhm,
it's kind of intimidating. So
mhm,
I think of all the issues we've done, this is the one where I got more uh, references for the
mhm,
places,
mhm.
because I wanted it to have that feel of being in India. I
Yeah.
mean, we only have a few scenes in it, but I wanted it to be a bit authentic, and
Yep.
it has the same energy,
Mhm,
same vibe and same busyness of the
Right.
place, because I think it's very important that when we're setting stories in other places, that the readers really feel like they're immersed in that place.
Hmm.
So I mean, comics is a 2D medium, and it's very hard for people to really experience how it is. So with just a few images,
Hmm.
I hope that we were able to convey that into how we wanted it to feel like.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was really an interesting experience, having to look through images about the different food, the different street culture,
Hmm.
and the likes. The stalls are very colorful and
Hmm.
very nice. It's very similar to what we have here, but of course
Hmm.
the food is different,
Yeah.
and the vibe is different, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities with the Philippines,
Hmm.
especially when you go to other places like Mindanao,
Hmm.
wherein the food and the culture might be a bit similar, but
Hmm.
it's still very very different. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really had to search a lot for references. But I think it's better for the story. It
Hmm.
really lends a hand to making it feel like they're really there.
Right.
uh,
That they've
you
gone
know
someplace. Yeah.
yeah, but I hope it conveys well.
I think it does. I mean, it certainly feels like it. It's got that crowded, Indian village sort of town vibe to it. And you mentioned something, and it struck me because it's something that's very true, and I don't think people think about until they actually make comics. Is you don't, or at least maybe the way we make comics is you don't spend a whole lot of time. It's like we spend half a page really in the village before we're at the house. You really don't have a lot of time to spend, looking at all the little details. So a panel, maybe two panels, really has to represent so much,
Mhm.
because then you move on. And so it's both a challenge, but it's also, you find a way to be concise in your storytelling so that one or two panels will carry over, and the reader still has the feeling that you're in India, even though you don't have all those details in every panel after that.
Yeah, we didn't want to make it seem like we're in a travel channel or something. Like, hey, this
Yeah.
is the food we're eating, or this is a good place where you can relax or have coffee. I mean, you put different images and
Mhm.
then just hint on some other
Right.
things, and then that's a fun thing about comics. It let your imagination
Hmm.
take over.
Right.
I mean, just like you said, just a few images will help feed the brain, and
Yep.
then the imagination takes over.
Hmm. Right. And again, we tell comics kind of in an old-fashioned way where we put a lot of story in, and things move relatively quickly. There's storytelling now, and I know you read books like this because I've read a lot of books like this, where they'll spend, a good 10, 15 pages just in that market, looking at all the things and going from here and going to there. And it really,
Eating shawarma or eating
yeah,
hamburger,
right. But it's a very,
walking in corridors.
right, it's very decompressed storytelling where they take a long time to move from here to there, and there's not much dialogue when you move from here to there. And it's storytelling, but it takes so long to get from one point to the next point. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not the way we tell our stories.
Yeah, well, like we mentioned in the previous commentary,
Hmm.
uh, artists and writers tend to be blindsided by a lot of things, and we just spend too much time with unnecessary things,
Yeah.
and that's what we learn as we go on is self-edit.
Hmm.
And just like you said earlier, make the story concise.
Yeah.
recognize what is important with the story and how it relates with the rest of the issue. So
Right.
the pacing has to be in your mind all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has to be in the artist's mind too. And that's, every story is different. Every comic is different. And this is the way that we tell our comic is we tell concise stories where we pare it down as much as we can to get all of the story that we want to tell in there. And every little bit is important for one reason or another. Yeah.
Yeah, but without sacrificing the important
Yeah.
bits.
Yeah.
I
No, and
mean,
in fact, usually I'm coming to you and begging to have an extra page or two, just so that we can make sure that we're hitting all the important bits.
correct, correct.
Yeah. Okay, so they are heading back to Gupta's house and Simon's grandmother's house. And Simon is talking to the grandfather, and the grandfather is really sort of extolling Simon's virtues, that you're the smartest kid in your school, you're the president of the student body, all of these stories that you get as a grandparent when you live far away. Really, he has no idea what Simon's life is like at school. He's only heard the good things from Simon's mother. Meanwhile, Ren ate something that she probably shouldn't and is not feeling too well, and is sort of running off to use the facilities. Um, and of course, the grandparents are like, "Why are you dating this girl?" And he's like, "I'm not dating her." Um, then we jump back to 1971. And what is going on is Abdul is telling Gupta, young Gupta, that Oliver, who is Simon's father, is going to, in America, when he grows up, is going to murder a woman. As we know, it's Trisha's wife, or I'm sorry, Trisha's mother. And of course, he does get convicted of it because we've seen that. Um, Gupta doubts this until he sees this newspaper clipping and sees himself in the newspaper clipping, and then he knows it's true. And Gupta, being a good father that he is, says, look, I will do whatever I can to change this course of history for Oliver. I don't want him to go to jail. And so Abdul is taking advantage of this and saying, yes, I will tell you the things that you need to know about the future, but you have to do something for me. You have to teach me about your theories about traveling outside through time using harmonics and things like that. And of course, Oliver, I'm sorry, Gupta wants to protect his family, and so he will do it. And that's kind of, again, another theme of this issue, which is what we will do for our family, to protect our family, that sometimes, the road to hell is lined with good intentions. And so that's what's going on there. Back in 2018, Ren is feeling terrible. I can't believe I put this in the script, but asked you to show us a bathroom without a toilet, which you did. Um,
No, no, I researched this. It
did you?
really looks like this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, good, because I researched it too, and that's what I saw too.
and I was quite surprised. I mean, there are places here in the Philippines wherein the facilities, as you call them,
Hmm.
are very inadequate,
For sure.
and the flushes sometimes don't work. So we have pails of water to
Hmm.
flush it, and
Yeah.
but it's very rare that I see
Right.
places that still has these things. But I'm pretty sure there are provinces that utilize this sort
Hmm.
of toiletries, toilet styles
Hmm.
in their places.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just another one of those cultural things that it's kind of different from what you're used to, but
Yeah.
it also lends an authenticity
Yeah.
to the place. So yeah,
Well, I will tell you that I have stayed in places in the United States where they still have outhouses. So it's
yeah,
yeah,
same here.
it's a thing. Um,
I mean, I just went to my wife's province, and that's exactly what they have there in
Mhm.
their rural place.
Yeah, places are like that. Humankind isn't so different. Um, so Ren is not feeling well. She is not feeling at all. So Simon is helping her to his father's childhood room. And once we get there, we can see, he's got um, posters on the wall from the 70s and, artists Ravi Shankar and, the Doors and probably the Beatles and stuff like that he liked at the time. And we see the tape recorder that we saw at the beginning. And Simon's grandmother is also helping Ren, to go ahead and get some rest. Meanwhile, she's also saying a little prayer for Ren. She's calling on Krishna to sort of look out for Ren and help her feel better. And this is sort of a running story between Simon and his grandmother. That Simon's grandmother has claimed that she has seen Krishna, who is roughly equivalent to the Hindu version of Jesus Christ, sort of the central godlike figure, someone who you can ask for help and will help you out. Um, in in Hindu belief, um, he's also a bit of a trickster. There's stories about when he was younger and stealing butter and doing this, and the moms all kind of laugh and delight at, the little tricks that he played. And so, there's an element to that about him as well. But anyway, Simon, of course, doesn't believe a word of this. Like in his logical mind, how do you ever meet a god? Um,
Mhm.
so he, he's sort of giving his his grandmother a little bit of grief about that, and Ren is kind of curious about it. It's like, was he really blue? And she's like, oh yeah, he was as blue as indigo, which is the ink that they use that they have been known to use. Um, so that's what's going on in 1971. So let's talk for a second about Oliver's childhood room, because we've seen like our teenagers' rooms in Miskatonic and sort of, their interest in how this. Here's one that you had to do for a kid who was in the 1970s. So how did you decide on sort of what this room was going to look like? Because it kind of becomes important later.
Yeah, actually, this panel came out really well. I
Hmm.
mean, I didn't at first. I didn't know how to do do it. I
Hmm.
mean, there was a lot of elements in it, so I was playing around with do I view it from the door,
Hmm.
and then I said, you know what, the window is pretty important here. I
Yeah.
mean,
Hmm.
I think it was in the script, but
Hmm.
I wasn't I didn't know how to draw it
Hmm.
with all the elements in it.
Hmm.
And then with the elements that was included, basically I just included what was important. Like
Hmm.
I mean, he has to have uh, a musical instrument there somewhere
Yep.
because the family seems to be very musically in tune.
Yep.
And then the recorder has to be there,
Yep.
books
Yep.
because of his interest in sciences and other things.
Hmm.
And then of course the posters, which
Hmm.
indicates that he's a young man who's
Hmm.
interested in pop culture,
Hmm.
which at that time was just beginning to boom.
Yep.
I mean, I truly believe that pop culture rose sometime around the late 60s
Yeah.
or 70s.
Certainly
So
pop
yeah,
culture as we think of it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then you mentioned the different artists that he might have listened to. I
Hmm.
mean, you mentioned the Beatles, and then I thought, you know what? I think the Doors would be more appropriate
Right.
as we go on in the issue. I
Yeah,
think
sure.
it's kind
Yeah,
of
I
a
liked it.
play on that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I really had fun with this
Hmm.
panel.
Right, and
and the curtains really
mhm,
added that certain vibe to it, which
mhm,
makes it airy, and
yep.
it's it turned out well. I really like this panel.
I do too, and we've talked about this before, and I will probably talk about it every time we do this, but as a writer, one of the things that I really like is going to a character's house and just seeing where they live because it informs so much about the character. Like you were saying, about the books, about the music, about the recording, about what artist he would like. Just it tells me so much about who Oliver was, that it just I love it. It makes it so much easier when you write a character once you've seen this or once you have an idea of what their room looks like. It helps so much. So, um, so back in 1971, um, Abdul is telling Gupta, um, or actually, sorry, Gupta is telling Abdul about, using musical frequency to open portals through space and time, to go out of time where you can then come back into time. Meanwhile, Abdul is telling him, "Don't forget your promise to me." We'll find out later what exactly that is. Um, and then Abdul jumps through the portal, which as we see through the portal, is lined with tentacles and stuff like that. So, we don't know exactly where he jumps to because then we jump back to 2018. And now we're out in the garden with Gupta, in our modern age, and Simon is going to talk to him. And we've learned that Gupta is now very involved in Hindu mysticism. And so he's talking to Simon, and I don't know what your experience was with talking with your grandparents, but this is very much what it was like talking to my grandfather. My grandfather was a pretty smart guy. And so we used to have these things where he would talk about things and I would be trying to show off that I knew some of those things as well to show him that, I wasn't an idiot, that I really am. Um, and so, talking about knowing Sanskrit, and what some of the words mean and what some of the symbols means. And Simon is trying to show off that he's smart, but Gupta is trying to tell Simon something, and I'm not sure that Simon is picking up on it just yet. He's talking about perception as we were talking about, and about the third eye and what it means. And according to the research that I did, was that both men and women used to wear it, and it has to do with perception, trying to perceive the correct path to go on so that you live your most full life and can move sort of upward. Um,
Yeah,
and so Simon thinks that he's just saying that, but Gupta is also trying to tell him about perceiving his correct path about time travel too, which we will of course see later. But Simon isn't picking up on that. Um, and so he's also telling him about the bindi, which is the third eye, um, and what it means in Sanskrit. And it means both particle and to drop. And so that seemed like a fun way to sort of draw us in through the portal, which Gupta also goes through with
the
Simon.
doors.
The doors of perception, yeah. To this place outside of time where we come across Abdul, who has just left 1971. So these two timelines are merging outside of time. And of course, here we're getting all these other portals into all these other dimensions, which looks so great. And I could basically, I want to write stories just to going off into all these different dimensions in time and space. Um, but we're telling Simon's story. Um, Well, why don't we take a minute and talk about that? So, we sort of knew that this place outside of space and time is linked to the dreamlands. The dreamlands that
Yeah,
we've seen, in previous issues. That really is sort of the underpinning for science. I'm sorry, for magic in our story, in our universe that we're telling is really it all sort of filters through the dreamland to get back into our world. So how did you decide what to show here? Because I certainly didn't. I just probably wrote there, he landed in a place with a bunch of portals. How did you decide what to show here?
Well, it's obviously that this will be prominent in future issues. I
Mhm.
don't want to tell more than that, but I chose all these images for a specific reason,
Mhm.
one thing or another.
Mhm.
And I also wanted it to relate with what we will see later,
Mhm.
which are the Hindu gods.
Right.
So I wanted to show that in the dreamlands,
Mhm.
all of the mythos exist.
Yeah.
So not only Lovecraftian mythos,
Right.
but also other cultural mythoses.
Mhm.
And what I mean about mythoses is the pantheons of gods.
Mhm.
So there are the Greeks, the
Mhm.
Egyptians,
Mhm.
the Hindu, the
Mhm.
Filipino, and other
Right.
stuff like Chinese or Japanese.
Right.
They all exist in the dream world because, in a way, the dream world is like an ancient internet
Mhm.
wherein the minds of the people converge,
Right.
so to speak.
Mhm.
So sometimes we feel like we dreamt something and then we see it in real life and then we say that, you know what, this looks kind of familiar,
Mhm.
or it's deja vu or something like that.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like that. The concepts of mankind is derived from dreams, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Right.
And so we kind of conceptualize that the dreamlands must have contained all of these things even before the start of time, if
Right.
Einstein would agree.
Right. Right. Yeah, we have talked at length about this,
Mhm.
but yeah, that the Dreamlands is sort of the connective tissue for everything. Both, it when Lovecraft wrote about him, he wrote about gods existing there. Both Egyptian gods as well as the gods that he was writing about, the outer gods and the things like that. That it all is connected there, and it just made so much sense for what we were doing with our story that everything would converge sort of here. And you're right, everything there is done for a very specific purpose that will probably come up sooner or later. Um, okay, so Simon is realizing that he is here with Abdul Al-Hazared. Um, Al-Hazared is telling him, yeah, hey Simon Harris, it's been a long time, it's been almost 50 years. Um, but really, Al-Hazared isn't after Simon the ways he isn't really all that concerned with Simon in the way that Simon is concerned with him. Al-Hazared is interested in getting back to our time, getting back to 2018. Um, and so he made Gupta promise to take him back to 2018 and made him promise to close the portal to 2018 so Simon couldn't follow them. He's essentially taking Simon's place in our modern time. Um, and Simon is like, come on, you can't do this. This guy is a murderer. Um, And the grandfather basically pulls him aside and says, "My fate is sealed. I swore I was going to do this, and I have to follow it through." He has his own honor, but also, here's a guy who understands about the nature of time and how everything is already done. So to him, fate is a very real thing. It's something that he cannot change. Um, and it's at this point that that Simon from issue 15 sees what's going on here. And Simon from now is trying to warn Simon from 15 that, hey, it was grandfather, arranged it from the beginning, and grandfather is telling both Simons, to shut up, that you can't change time. Simon from 15 goes away, and Simon from issue 19 is stuck inside this place outside of time. And the portal to 2018 is closed, and he is stuck there. And for you sharp-eyed viewers, you will notice that um, there is a vision to a certain image from our yearbook.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm so glad you included that one. I like that one.
yeah. Well, we had the intention of showing that time here
Mhm.
is not as relative as
Right.
Einstein indicates. So there's a kind of contrarian sort of thing that's going on here. I mean, we show Einstein
Sure.
previously, and then we make all these mathematical equations, and
Mhm.
then show that no, actually there are other alternate
Right,
timelines too, which
right.
which we kind of covered as well with what was that guy's name?
A Goodle?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it just playing with
Right,
the with the different stories that we made that
right.
this happened some time ago, but we're not exactly sure when this was it the time when they were there or some other time,
Right, right. It could, yeah, I mean, we don't see any characters there, it could be come from any time. But yeah,
Yes.
really what we've done is, from the very beginning is we've established that time travel is a thing. And, by this issue, we're using physics, theoretical physics to show that yes, time travel really is a thing, but we've been using magic to show that time travel is a thing from the very beginning. So, yeah, either you go with it or you don't.
Yep.
Okay, so back in 2018, Gupta and Abdul are climbing out, and grandmother's like, "Where is Simon?" Which is a fair point. Where is Simon? But uh, Gupta is like, don't bother me. I did what I must, as must you. Um, Meanwhile, Ren is getting up and hears something and goes out in the hall and sees Abdul, and she's like, you're that homeless smelling guy. And he Abdul isn't having it with Ren and uses his magic to open up this picture and basically shove her in. Um, Poor Ren. Um, yeah, poor Ren. Anyway, we
I
then
wonder
go.
what happens to her.
I wonder what happens to her. We go back outside of time, and Simon is trying to use his logic to figure out how do I get back to 2018. Um, But this blue figure comes up behind him and is telling him, "Oh, that path appears closed to you." And Simon is like, "Well, can you help me?" And he's starting to realize, "Wait a minute, I'm talking to a blue guy who's dancing around with a flute." And he's like, "You're Krishna, and this doesn't make any rational sense." And Krishna's like, "Yeah, then you have to accept it on faith." And then we get to see some figures from Hindu mythology, which I think is awesome. Um, do you want to talk a bit about how you decided which figures to draw and how you drew them? Or yeah,
Yeah, it's the majority of the most well-known deities in Hindu mythology.
yeah, the pantheon.
And just like the rest of the issue,
Mhm.
lots of references for this.
Yeah,
Also, wow, they're so elaborate
yeah, they really
and
are.
at the same time very beautiful to look at. I
Yeah.
mean,
Hmm.
the creativity that went into all of their costumes is
Hmm.
pretty spectacular. And
Right.
even though it was quite a chore
Hmm.
to draw all of them, I think it was well worth it. I mean,
Yeah.
I always have fun when drawing dreamland scenes,
Hmm.
and seeing them here
Hmm.
in an Indian landscape like
Hmm.
this is very spectacular.
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's a stunning image. I love it. But what I really want to do, if you don't mind, is single out. I love how you've designed Krishna because Krishna feels like a Miskatonic High character here. He's the right age, so he feels appropriate to Simon. He's,
Mhm.
he's got that smile. He's sort of dancing around. He just I really like the way that you captured him, where he feels like a real character that Simon's having a conversation with, and they feel kind of like their peers, and like they're almost two
Mhm.
sides, like again, Simon is very logical and Krishna is here, sort of the same age, sort of dancing around, and he's like, look, you got to check your rationality at the door because you're going to go on this strange adventure and you just got to accept it.
Yeah, well, I think it was very important for us to show Krishna as a very well-rounded character because
Mhm.
he does show up in this issue quite significantly,
Yeah.
just like the grandmother and the grandfather. So
Right.
I really made it a point to make them a fully realized character.
Hmm.
And once you start drawing them, you
Hmm.
kind of draw out their personality.
Hmm.
And Krishna is was very easy to uh, determine how he acted
Hmm.
because when you think about being a trickster, kind of a trickster
Hmm.
and kind of young
Hmm.
and kind of an opposite of Simon.
Hmm.
I mean, I know what we know what ticks off Simon. And
Right.
so I deliberately made a character that would be annoying to him.
Yeah, yeah, this would be it.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, we always find Simon to be the most interesting when he has someone to bounce off of, you
Yes, that's
know.
very true. Mhm.
And Krishna is the character that is the one that kind of acts like Ren or Alex.
Mhm.
And yeah, I agree. He's
Mhm.
a pretty cool character that could fit in to the Miskatonic world
Yeah, he really could.
because I patterned him after Simon. Actually,
Yeah, you can sort of see
I
that.
purpose I purposely made him. What if Simon was
A Hindu
was
god? Yeah.
Krishna during the?
Right.
Because we talk about reincarnations and
Right.
stuff,
Right. Right.
and it's just I modeled him after Simon, but obviously he's a very different character.
Right. Right. And I did my own research before writing Krishna, knowing and then talking with a friend of mine who is Hindu, and he sort of pointed me down a lot of paths to sort of help lead me to this. And his point was the Hindu mythology, the Hindu pantheon is treated sort of like, well, he was telling me that, when he was a kid, he got comic books about the Hindu gods, and Krishna was always at the center of them. And so it was sort of about his adventures. And that was really sort of one of the points that sort of led me to using Krishna was the idea that he could be a hero, that he could be a comic book character, that he could really fit into this story. And so yeah, I think we're coming sort of full circle with that, which is, you making him into an actual comic book character, and using him to tell this story. But we did it in a way that sort of honored the character. We were not making fun of the Hindu mythology. We're treating it very seriously, but seriously in a way that's important to our story.
Yeah, just
Mm.
like what we talk about perception, this is how Simon perceives
Right.
this certain character.
Mhm.
I mean, when like you said, we talk about the Dreamlands a lot, so I don't really want to get into this, but
Right.
this is Simon's personal dreamscape.
Right.
I think people will understand that as the series goes on. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is how he perceives Krishna.
Right. Right. And it's sad because he perceives him as somebody who would drive him crazy.
Well, I think he drives himself crazy.
I think he does too. Yeah, I think that's right. So in 2018, Abdul is trying to figure out how to get back to Miskatonic because he's got his own sort of purpose that we will figure out later. Meanwhile, Simon's grandmother is going to Abdul and says, you need to come with me. There's something that you need for your journey, and she's just basically pulling him along. Um, to Oliver's room. One of the things that I really liked was it took me a while to figure out in the script how important the grandmother was going to be. We and then once in developed in the script and the way that you drew her, sometimes we do this thing where we set up characters and they seem like they're just there for comic relief. So like at the beginning, she's like hugging him and not letting him talk and making and talking about Ren and Simon, being together and they're not. And it seems like she's just there for jokes, but by the time we get to this point, we're starting to realize that she's a really important character in this story. It's sort of similar to the way that we sort of developed Anton over a longer period, where we sort of set him up as, he tells jokes, he swears a lot, but then as you realize that he's actually a really important character and that he's going through his own story. Um, so it's one of the things that I like about our series, which is these characters might seem like something, but don't you might perceive them as something, but don't assume that's necessarily what they're going to be because a lot of times they become important.
Yeah,
Mhm,
definitely.
mhm,
I mean, in the case of Anton, it's not just a personal development, but his whole background is
mhm.
very important to the whole series in the end.
Yep. Yep. And that we also, you know, uh, his background, his family's background, like the whole thing becomes really important. But also, he's making choices about who he is as a person, and we see that over the course of the series. That he's making his choices the same way that Simon's making his choices, the same way Ren is making her choices. That all of these characters have to make these choices, and those choices have consequences.
Yeah, definitely.
So back in the dreamland, Krishna is sort of trying to explain to Simon uh, that the whole idea of karma um, and fate and how they seem to be two opposing ideas, which is karma is your choice, what choices you make, and the consequences of that. Whereas fate is it's already predetermined. How can both of these things exist at once? And in Simon's rational mind, it makes no sense whatsoever. All he wants to do is get back to 2018, and Krishna is just walking him around in circles this whole time, and they end up right back where they started off. Um, Simon is just losing it because all he wants to do is get back to 2018, and Krishna is actually trying to teach Simon something. And then we get this splash page, which is one of my favorite things in this issue, of these two circles of Simon's timeline of him from a baby all the way up through adulthood and into death and then reincarnation. And then the choice between is he reincarnated again and going on the same path or is he reincarnated and making different choices and going on a different path? Um why don't you talk about this? Because this was a complicated concept for me to throw at you in the script, and I wasn't sure that you were gonna understand what I was even asking for.
Yeah. Well, initially I didn't. I mean, it was pretty hard to wrap my brain around it because you have to understand that script uh, is basically just words
Mhm,
that you have to translate into image.
mhm,
And it's not necessarily a simple 1:1.
Right.
You have to draw it in a way that it would look interesting to the viewers, the readers. And initially, when I was reading through it, I didn't know how to implement it, but I had a bit of an idea
Mhm.
as it went on.
Mhm.
But I wasn't sure if that was what you wanted. So when I showed you the pencils, I
Mhm.
think you were a bit skeptical because the effects weren't there yet.
Yeah.
And and as you know, when I pencil stuff, it's very simplistic because I was also going to be the inker and the colorist. So
Right.
it's just for economic senses. And but once I was able to lay it out, I think it became pretty clear to me what I wanted it to look like.
Yeah.
It just did occur to me that when it was time to color it, it would be quite difficult because of the effects. I
Right.
mean, drawing all the characters was actually the easiest part of this,
Mhm.
and it's really fun to see how Simon
Yeah.
grew from baby to adulthood and
Mhm.
to his perceived
Right.
adulthood.
Right.
and and the smaller one is actually an alternate uh, version of him.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was, as the image came together, it became really an interesting piece
Mhm.
and an interesting way to show exposition, because
Yeah.
as we know, comic books tend to be very exposition heavy,
Yeah.
and when there's no accompanying visuals to make it interesting, it just becomes a chore to read through it.
Yeah.
So this way, it's sort of like a follow my adventure type
Mhm.
of thing, wherein it's kind of a game of um, can you figure it out where this is going, and
Right.
then at the same time it's telling a story.
Right.
And if you look at the image, you could actually derive a lot more things from it than what's initially shown.
Mhm.
And I think that it conveys what you wanted in the script,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it makes the, like I said before, it makes the reading experience more interesting in a
Right.
visual sense.
Right. I think that's something that people don't understand about the process of creating comics is the script is sort of how I see it, and, obviously, once it goes through your edits and come back and I sort of do some rewriting on it, it's sort of a vision, but it's all words. So, and handing it off to you, I don't expect you to see it exactly the same that way that I am. What the script is, it's an expectation of the important elements and what we're trying to say in that scene. It's not
Mm-hmm.
you must show this in quarter profile and you must have this character here and they must be doing this. It's this is what we need to tell the story. We need to see Ren here. We need to see Simon here because they're having this conversation. Maybe if you can show this because it's an important element to the conversation. And so it was my attempt to explain about the way that reincarnation works, but also works with the idea of fate and karma, that there's these alternate timelines of how Simon can go. And I had seen a diagram that sort of gave me this idea in the first place. But then I can throw that to you and I don't need it to look exactly like I had seen it. I just needed you to understand the concept so that you can create something visual because you're much better at that. And it's going to look a lot better than, what if you saw it in my head is not as good. And so once you interpret it and understand what we're trying to say, it doesn't matter if it looks exactly like as I write it in the script. What matters is that it works for the story. And I think by you understanding it, by you interpreting it, and you figuring out a very cool way to show it, that sort of informs the readers without it just being text heavy. Yeah, absolutely. That's what comics is. It's a collaboration between a writer and the artist, but it doesn't have to be the writer's vision. It's that shared vision of my ideas, your ideas coming together to be this.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you added the footsteps to
Mhm,
the image, and I think that really helped the image to sell it even further.
mhm. Right, and, one of the things that I really love about this is we have been talking for a long time about Simon becoming Alhazred, and, we've talked about it for a long time, but we've never actually shown readers what it would look like, and so now we get to see it. We get to see exactly how he would grow into becoming this character, or how Simon perceives that he would grow into becoming this character that we've seen for so long. And it's like, okay, you can now see it. You can see step by step how he would become, which in Simon's mind is great because that's how he thinks, is logically step by step, becoming this. And Krishna is using that by saying, what were the steps that led you here? And, Simon is talking about it, about being a baby, about making good choices, and then he didn't make a good choice. He stole the election to become the student body president. That was a defining moment for Simon, I think, because up until then, he really, maybe he did things that were bad, maybe he didn't do things that were bad or immoral, but that's the one thing that he can pinpoint where he made an immoral choice to get what he wanted. And he may have been influenced by the Gittim, he may not have been, it's tough to tell. But in Simon's mind, that was his choice and he made it. And maybe that's what's leading him on this path.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, okay, so we got that cool page. And so now Simon is starting to understand. He's sort of learning the lessons that Krishna is trying to tell him about fate, but also about karma, about choices. And what choices is Simon going to make moving forward? And that if your path is closed off to you, which path is open to you? And he's talking about that both, morally, spiritually, however you want to think it. But he's also talking about in this time travel story, your path to 2018 is closed. So which path is open to you? And so Simon goes and is looking at these portals, and he sees that the portal to 1971 and his grandparents when they were younger is still open. And so he's using his logical mind to think, okay, well, if I can go back into 1971, I can't convince my grandfather to change time because he's already said that he's not going to, that fate is too strong. But my grandmother's there. What could I do to get my grandmother to do something 40 something years in the future? And of course, he has this idea. She would have to follow his instructions religiously.
mhm.
Um, I love that, the portal is upside down to go into 1971. So I flipped the lettering to match
Yeah.
what you had done there.
I actually kind of just noticed that now.
Right. I just follow what you do. So
I
um
mean,
mhm,
if you're in a different dimension, or at least a place where all the dimensions link, it
mhm.
wouldn't be linear, right? It would
Right,
be like revolving around.
right. But also it's exactly it works because Krishna's telling Simon to look at things differently, to perceive them differently,
Mhm.
than they are. And that's the whole story is about Simon understanding and using his powers of perception to find the right path. And it's not always your right path isn't always going to be linear. It isn't always going to be the straightforward thing. Sometimes you're going to go upside down. And so he
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
Mhm.
Basically, Krishna is like telling him the answer without telling him the answer.
Which is,
He's he's
yeah,
he's guiding him towards the answer, but he has to figure that out himself.
right.
And I think Simon, in a way, is that way. He
Right.
has to figure things out on his own.
Yes, exactly.
And that's
Okay.
why I said that this is how he perceives Krishna.
Mhm,
If there's a personification of a guide, of a deity who's guiding him, it
mhm.
wouldn't be someone would tell him, do this, do
Right.
that, go here, go there. It would be these are the elements to the equation. Now you
Mhm.
have to solve it.
Right, right. And really that's it's exactly what Simon would want, but it's also sort of what we're doing with this story, which is this is a time travel story that Simon needs to figure out the solution to. It
Mhm.
you could almost do it as a word problem, X is stuck in 2000, in 1971 and needs to figure out how to get to 2018. It's exactly, that. Simon likes puzzles, he likes problems, he likes to solve for things, and really that's what we're putting Simon into. We're throwing him in this, and we're like, "Here's the elements, you figure out the solution."
Yeah.
So he goes to 1971, sees his grandmother, who is a young woman now, a young mother, and she turns around because she heard something, and he's like, "Don't you know me?" And she's like, and as she turns around, she sees that he has covered himself in the indigo ink that Oliver was using in the very first page of this issue, um, to look like Krishna. And is using the flute, and she, of course, thinks that he is Lord Krishna, which we already know because she told us that she saw Lord Krishna. Um, So Simon is using her faith in Lord Krishna and what she has told him about Lord Krishna to get her to do something 40 odd years in the future in 2018. And so he's giving her a set of instructions, which he doesn't tell us, but it has to do with this recording. And as he starts the recording, we jump to 2018. Before we do that, I want to talk for very briefly. Simon in blue. Did you have to do anything other than draw Simon and just color him differently, or did you draw him differently as well?
No, not really. Like I said, I patterned Krishna after Simon.
Yeah.
So when you turn him blue,
Uh-huh.
it will just be a very easy transition to do
Right.
it.
Right.
And let me just say that this solution is very Simon in a very oddball kind of way. I mean, I could imagine Alex being there and saying, seriously, this is going to work?
Yeah, there's no way. But the thing about it is, if you think about it from Simon's point of view, he already knows it's going to work because he
Yeah, that's
knows
it.
his yeah, that's the
Like I
amazing.
said, it's an equation. He
Yeah,
already knows the answer.
right.
It's just he's solving for the other
For the other
elements.
side of the equation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a perfect Simon story. Okay, so back in 2018, um, the grandmother starts playing the recording that we just recorded. Um, and it is Simon, which Alhazar realizes, on it, and he is playing the flute. And the song that he's playing, the music that he's playing, is the same music that he learned from his father in the jail cell in issue 12. That brings in the goopy sort of slime monsters from the outer dimension, and they come in through the window, which we've seen, which again you pointed out was in that we saw the last time we were in Oliver's room, and grabs him and starts pulling him out the window into the outer dimension like we had seen again in issue 12. He is begging for the grandmother to pull him in, and she's like, "No." She takes back the recording and basically lets him fly off, and he flies off out into the sort of other dimension that we saw in 12, and we'll explain that later. Meanwhile, she goes back, and starts the recording again. Simon has, of course, figured out this whole solution. So the next thing that he plays is closing the portal. So the portal closes, um, and he's telling her on the recording, reminding her, you have one more task to perform. He's telling her she's gotta learn a musical instrument, she's gotta follow this set of notes, which he remembers because the grandfather told him, "Listen very carefully to these sets of notes," which he had, and so he wrote them down for her in 1971, um, so that sh in Oliver's textbook that he was learning about time and Einstein and all of that, and told her to go play it in the garden. Meanwhile, so she's running out to go do that, and we see Ren climbing back out of the picture, um,
Hmm.
which again, we will touch on later, but I kind of felt bad about sidelining Ren through this story because really Ren is a very fun person to have in these stories, so it was kind of a shame that she sorta got shoved to the side for this, but it's also kind of fun to see something magic-like being shoved into a picture that seems like a very Alhazred thing to do to someone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think she might have had her own adventure somewhere
Yeah,
in
you
time.
maybe. Um, Grandmother goes outside, plays the flute, opening the portal back up to for the 2018 portal that was closed, and out climbs Simon. Um, she hugs him, he can't talk again, and then grandfather comes. Simon is ready for a confrontation here. He is ready to confront his grandfather. He thinks his grandfather hates him. He thinks his grandfather is a jerk. He just, thinks that his grandfather is evil. He thinks his grandfather's going to shove him back outside of time. He thinks all of these things. And instead, the grandfather's like, I always knew you could do it. And what we find, you know, what we find out after they send the grandmother away is the grandfather knew that Simon was going to do this the whole time and that he was counting on Simon to do this the whole time. That the grandfather really felt like he was boxed into this place where he had to do this thing, but he knew because Simon is such a great character, such a great guy. He's so smart. He's the class president. He's all these things that Simon is going to be able to solve all the problems. And
just
Simon,
not just not the way he thought it would be.
yeah, right, and that, right, exactly. That he thought he was going to solve it in a different way, but for Simon, something happened outside, when he met Krishna and he actually learned something from Krishna, about who he was, about who he's supposed to be, about what being perfect means, and so when the grandfather is saying all these great things about him, rather than agreeing, he finally comes clean and he admits, I'm not. I rigged that election to win that election. And the grandfather's like, he just stares at him for a minute. He can't believe that he cheated. And I really like the way that you handled this with the emotions between Simon and the grandfather. You can feel the worry that Simon has about losing his grandfather's respect. You can feel how the grandfather might get angry, might lose it at any moment, because we've seen that in the family. We've seen the way that Oliver treated Simon when he was little and he didn't play the musical notes right. You know,
Mhm.
Oliver learned that somewhere, and he probably learned it from his father. And so, there's a choice that the grandfather is making here about, okay, how do I handle this kid telling me that he cheated, that he stole this election, that he did something. And so he asks him, would you have won the election if you hadn't cheated? And it's a question that I don't I've gotten actually from readers and from other people who have read our story so far is would Simon have won the election if he hadn't cheated? Because they thought he ran a great campaign, that, people were really starting to turn on Josh, and that maybe Simon would have won.
Mhm.
And, the answer that I have is the same answer that Simon has. It's Simon's perception. He's the only one who would probably know, and the answer is he doesn't know. He
Mhm.
didn't count him, he didn't know, he just did the logical things to make sure that he won.
Yeah.
You know, and the grandfather, again, he has his own story, which is, he internalizes and thinks, yeah, you know what? I didn't trust Oliver enough. You know, when I found out that Oliver was going to murder someone, I set up these boundaries. I said, you cannot marry a white woman. You cannot do these things. And so Oliver had to go around him, had to change his name in order to marry Trisha's mother, to do all of these things, setting up the exact things that the grandfather didn't want to happen, because he did not trust Oliver enough. That really what it comes down to is neither one of them trusts enough. And
I
maybe,
think
yeah.
Simon didn't trust himself either.
Mhm.
And you were asking whether he would have won, and I don't think he trusted himself
Yeah.
either, because he perceived himself as this other thing, and that people wouldn't trust him
Right.
with with the election.
Right. That they wouldn't trust him to be the president, that they wouldn't trust
Yeah,
him to do the things for them. Yeah, it's really what you get to is Simon's got a lot of self-doubt about who he is, and anyway, yeah, there's a lot there, and
yeah. We just see that things
mhm,
are more complex than people tend to lead on, and sometimes we make decisions that you know probably is not the best,
mhm,
but given that time in that situation, people tend to make mistakes, and either they make up for it or they just face the consequence.
right, or they don't, or they just keep moving on with what they were doing. And that, what we really come around to full circle in the issue is Simon came here to find out if he could find out the way to not become Abdul al-Hazred. And the truth is, Krishna said, yes, here it is. Here is the way. You have to make the right decisions in your life in order to not become this person. And so Simon is leaving with that information, that all he has to do for the rest of his life to not become Al Hazared is to be perfect.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So that, now that we've gotten that out of the way, everybody's happy. Everybody's, the grandmother's like, let's go get a nice dinner. And Simon's like, about that, we still don't have any clothes from that plane crash. Um, So she provides them with new clothes, takes them out to dinner, and, she dresses them all up, and she's saying, "Oh, you're so handsome, you look like a Raja." Um, and then comes Ren dressed up in, her finery. Um, and then they Simon says something nice about Ren, and Ren says something nice about him, and then they kiss, which I certainly didn't expect. But apparently the grandmother did, because the grandmother knew it all along. Um,
Grandmothers always know.
grandmothers always know. We talked about this because uh, before we did this, talked about, there's if you look at fandom, there are people always shipping one character and another character together, and we didn't want to do that, but we wanted, if the characters developed a certain way, that we were willing to go and sort of follow them through that. And so that's sort of what's going on here. We started them on this path through the Philippines, now to India, and really both of them have changed since the start of that. and
Mhm.
their relationship has changed since the start of that. And really, it's just you can see this happening. It happens to kids all the time, to teenagers all the time. It happens to grown-ups all the time. You throw them together, people that you don't think would fit together, and they find themselves fitting together.
Yeah, the most unlikely pair
Yeah,
usually ends up together.
right. Yeah, they say that passion, it comes in very different funny ways.
And situations also lead to funny little
Right.
things.
Right, and really, we didn't know where these characters were gonna go when we put them together and said, "Okay, they're gonna go on this trip together." We just thought it was an interesting pairing because we didn't see them much together, and we knew that there was a lot of, animosity there, there were sparks there, and we thought that would be a really fun thing to play with through the course of this season, and it really has been fun to see, them together.
Mhm.
It's both in the Philippine story and here, it's just they were just so fun to see together. I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we end, a strange place, not 2018, to a scream. And that space looks familiar. Like maybe we've seen it in this issue.
Did we?
Yeah, I don't
Is
know.
it a real place?
Is it a real place? Could it be?
By the way, I like that line, not
Yeah.
2018.
Well, I was doing
That's
it.
so
It's like,
appropriate.
right. Well, I was get there. It's like, well, we had been going back and forth 2018, 1971. It's like, neither of those fit here, but I need to make sure people understand that it's not now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny.
Yeah.
That's great, man.
And so that's our issue. I really love this one. I'm so happy with how it came out. I'm so happy with the journey that they've been on, first the Philippines and now this. It just I wasn't sure how either one of those parts of the journey was going to go, and they ended up going even better than I could have imagined.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And also, this is going to lead into more interesting stories in the near future. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it
Yep.
will be very interesting indeed.
Right, both in the short term and the long term, that's
Mhm.
the thing about the way we do stories is, we tell you, we answer some things, and then we start some new questions about what's gonna happen next. Ah.
Did you plan this? I
Yes,
thought you were going to end this in issue 6.
right? Yep, yep, some people always ask, like, "When are you gonna end this? When are you gonna end this?" I'm like, "Are you not liking it? Do you want us to end it now?" That's not an option, by the way, we're not ending it now. Okay. That's
I
pretty much
think I'm going to grow more white hair before this thing ends.
yeah, well, you by the time that we're done, either you or I are gonna look like Al Hazared, look all scruffy and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This is portents of future to come.
That's very scary because I think at one
Oh
point
yeah,
I think at one point we say that he has fleas in his beard, so I'm hoping that's not gonna be me.
that's red. That's all red.
Right, well. Anyway, so that's that. Thank you for listening to this. We will be launching the campaign for issue 20 very soon. It's sort of a haunted house sort of story about Matt and Alex and some of his family's very dark past. Um, it's setting up to end the season. So 20 leads directly into 21, leads directly into 22, which will be the end of season 3. So
Yeah,
this is a fun one. It's gonna
it's
lead.
basically a three-parter.
It really is. In fact, one of the variant covers is basically part one of a three-part cover that fits together. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. It gets so crazy,
Gets so dark.
so dark, so crazy. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but it ends. Everything in this season builds up to this ending, and it is a major ending.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
you
right.
can
So
say you can say that.
I can't say anything else because I don't want to make any spoilers, but it is a major ending.
Yeah,
Um, yep. So yeah, so look for the campaign for issue 20 to start very soon on Kickstarter. Follow the updates on issue 19 because we will be announcing everything for issue 20 very, very soon. We are working on setting up all the campaign right now, so that'll be a fun one. And I'm just waiting for the physical comics to come in, and then we'll be shipping those out. So
cool.
very cool. All right, Ryan, thank you so much. I'm gonna go crash. You enjoy your day.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some lunch.
That's the thing that it's like the comic. You're in one timeline and I'm in a different timeline.
Not 2018.
No, not 2018. All right. So long, everybody.
All right. See ya.
See ya.